Welcome to the Product Development Playbook with the Finish Line crew, Rachel Trantz, Raphael Arlekin, and Steve Owens.
All right, well, let's welcome our audience to the Product Development Playbook with the Finish Line crew. As promised, we have a sticky one today. Really, really good one. Our subject today is, why do product development projects go over budget? Is it poor planning? Is it that the cost was not calculated accordingly? All right, Steve, how about it? What are your thoughts?
Well, this is not only a problem for product development, but for anybody that is doing something for the first time, right? I think often the expectation in any business is that, hey, manufacturing, they say the COGS are going to be $12.931, and they were almost correct. They were $12.930. Why can't product development be that accurate, right? The advertising budget was, $21,236, and their budget was $22,000. Why they always stay on budget? These guys always stay. What's wrong with these damn engineers, right? And I've worked in a lot of companies. I've worked in big ones. I've worked in small ones. And there is this air that engineers in product development don't know how to manage budgets. Okay. And I think that's a very easy answer for a lot of people to sort of take and understand, and oh, that's the answer. And and I've seen people where they'll throw an accountant on the product development team. That doesn't work. Okay. They'll throw some manager who was really good and it just slows everything down and ends up costing more. And it's all because people don't fundamentally understand what the root cause of this is. Okay. And I will tell you, I didn't for a very long time, right? I remember the first company we started in the very first project, and we were very, very disciplined and diligent in figuring out, exactly what each task was and how much it was going to cost and blah, 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 blah. And we gave our budgets, and then everything was forgotten about, right? The budget, I only found out years later that we were like 3x that budget, right? There was absolutely no feedback at that time. We just made the budget. It was used to justify the ROI of the project, right? So they went through some committee to allocate the capital. The capital was allocated. Presumably at some point in the project, we were way over budget. Nobody ever told us. Nobody ever said anything, right? I don't know if they really didn't care because they'd already spent the money. It wasn't hard for me
Well,
to
this
tell at
sounds
that
like a
time.
big company, right? Because
It was a big company, but I will tell you, it's no different than a small company. In a lot of ways, it's actually worse than a small company. Okay. And we can get to those reasons in a minute. But to continue with the story, as my career progressed, this was a reoccurring theme. And as I started to move up in management, right, I was getting this feedback, right? What I realized was that my managers were protecting me from this pressure. Okay. And I think they did it sort of instinctively because they knew that if they try to enforce this budget at this point in time, it would only screw everything up and you'd get an ROI of zero. And from their mind, as long as the ROI was positive, we should continue with the project. The hell with the budget. Okay. And but as I got into management, I started trying to understand exactly what's going on here, and I started to actually get feedback on the plan. So instead of producing the plan and then forgetting about it after we got the budget allocated, we got the plan and started running it and started to see where things went wrong. And there's when the light bulb started to turn on,
okay.
right? The issue was not that we couldn't estimate how long it was going to take us to lay out a PC board or write some software or design the enclosure or test it. we were very accurate about that. And only rarely would things go wrong. It did happen. Okay. Sometimes these tasks, there was something you just didn't know about and it would take you a lot longer to do it. But that was a very rare event. What we realized is that, yeah, day one, we didn't know all those tasks. We didn't know what we had to do. It was only as the project moved forward did we realize, oh, yeah, we need to do that. We didn't realize we needed FCC compliance. We're going to have to do FCC. We can't sell this without that, right? Nobody, that's kind of a very naive example that you should know about. But what happens is not that the engineers can't estimate the task, is that the engineers can only estimate the task they know at that particular time, right? And unfortunately, almost all product development projects, they need those tasks and probably 2 or 3 times more tasks. And so the real root cause of most of these projects going over budget is not that the engineers can't estimate how long it's going to take them to do the things. It's that they nor anybody else can always anticipate all the tasks that are necessary to be done to get that project to market, right? To get that product to market.
So how do we go about disfragmenting the project into stages to try to control the cost? Is that effective?
That is very effective because and I think it was one of the reasons that StageGate started to get really popular, right? StageGate has been around for a long time, okay? And I've always believed, I don't know if it's actually true or not, but I've always believed that StageGate came from the investment community because it's very similar to how people invest money. And if you think about it, the product development is an investment, right? It is you are going to spend money and you hope to get that money back, okay? And like any investment, you don't want to come up with an investment thesis and then just jump in 100%. Okay, that's always a mistake, right? You want to test that thesis out in some sort of small way, right? Whatever it may be. Let's say that your investment thesis is, oh, I'm going to roll up a whole bunch of product development companies, make them a big one, and then we'll get a PE multiple or something. Well, let's try to see what happens if we do one, okay? And then if we do one, let's try two. And then if we can do that, let's do four. And if we can do that, let's do 8, okay? That's stage gate. Now the investment community doesn't call it that, but nonetheless, that's the process that they, go through. Why do they do that? Because they're trying to take baby steps, and at each end of each step, they're trying to see, do we still have an ROI here, right? We had an investment thesis, and do we have an ROI? Is it still true, right? And I think the same is true on product development. When you start, you just have this broad idea, right? Now you start with requirements, okay? And if your initial thinking was, I'm going to make up something simple. Oh, the COGS will be $10, okay? And then you start working on the requirements, you start listing all the functions, and the engineers say, there's no way you can get all those functions for $10 COGS for that quantity. You might want to decide to stop right there. We can't get, if we can't get the COGS to $10, no ROI, let's stop, right? You have spent some money. It costs money to generate requirements, right? That's people cost. It's not free. It does cost money, but if you decide to go, great, let's do a conceptual design. Now, if you do a conceptual design and you also find out that something's changed, okay, and again, that can be you can't meet the requirements, or it could be that the cost of something went up in that amount of time, or that marketing did a bunch of market validation experiments and they find out that, you need these extra features, whatever, all kinds of things can happen at the conceptual design stage, both good and bad, right, by the way, okay? But at the end of conceptual design, again, you're saying, is there an ROI? And this is where there's a very interesting point, right? Because I think a lot of people focus too much on the budget. The focus needs to be on ROI, not the budget, right? If I told you, hey, look, if we spend $1,000 more on product development, we'll cut the COGS in half. Oh, and by the way, you're selling $1,000 a day, so your return on investment is one day. Only a fool would say no to that. But what if that blows the budget, right? If your only consideration is a budget, you're going to turn that choice down. And obviously you won't be as competitive as somebody who did figure out how to do that, right? So I think part of the problem is this entire focus on budget and not focus on ROI. Okay. They are different things. Yes, you know, if you can do it for less, the same thing for less, that's super powerful. And as you know, we focus on that all the time, right? And trying to get it less and less, and we succeed. Okay. But there's another side to that, which is, yes, if we can do it less, but we've eroded the ROI, or we can do it a little bit more and we've greatly increased the ROI, that's a different kind of decision. And you've got to think about both, right? Especially at these stage gate things. And the question is not, are we still on budget? The question is there still an ROI on this project?
Rachel, due to your research, how does this type of scenarios transpire among different industries?
So it is widespread across many industries that, let's see, there was a study that was done of 1,500 different projects, and 15% of those projects went over budget by 200%. So that was a very widespread amount of data, but the amount that those projects go over budget can be really detrimental to small companies. There are some that say they can 25 to 30% of projects can ruin a company. 25 to 30% of projects that go over budget can ruin the company itself from being able to be successful. So it's very widespread across.
I hear that. Well, I think that I feel what Steve is saying. You're focusing heavily on the project. You're relating everything to ROI. Let's focus on the ROI. Is it there? What can we do to maintain a positive ROI and adjust the investment as needed? And that comes in the base of like the requirements, the projects, the studies, and everything. But there's another phenomenon out there that tends to happen, and I'm very curious to hear your opinions. And is this? Let's assume that I'm working with a client. We have a great relationship. We sit down, come up with a statement of work. We have an estimate. We deploy that to start the project. We're working on it. And then the customer says, oh, hey, and by the way, I would love to add this extra feature in there. Can you make that happen for me? Hey, we talk all the time. We're friends. So I'm like, yeah, sure. We can do that. Absolutely. I think that's a massive trap because, yes, the customer requested something within our wheelhouse and our capabilities. We can make that happen. That is easy. But guess what? Now the budget will change. It might not be drastic, but it will change. And that conversation, now the customer has built an expectation. He's like, well, they agree that they will add feature A to my project. So awesome. But we never established the budget. And guess what? When I show him feature A, he's going to be delighted. The customer is going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, man, you guys made it work. It looks awesome. Oh, and by the way, the cost went up. $5,000, $10,000, whatever amount. Wait, what do you mean? You're over budget. Wait, time out. You asked me to do this. Well, yeah, but we agreed on a budget. Well, but you changed the scope. But that's never agreed. I'm sure you guys get the point. I believe that is one of the biggest issues sometimes when it comes down to at least managing a project, and is maintaining the relationship with the customer and also the scope of the project on check. Because when you start adding things, it doesn't matter. The budget changes. And if that is not agreed upon, it's like
You're exactly right. And there was a time in our history, as there probably is with a lot of product development companies, where that would happen to us all the time, right? The customer would anchor to this low number. They would add, 500 tasks between then and now, and then somehow criticize us for, not maintaining budget. And, the answer to that is actually pretty simple. And much easier today than it was years ago, right? There are sophisticated project management systems in place. We use one of those. We have a very rigorous process where nobody can bill time unless it's already been pre-authorized, that's already in the plan, that shows us not only how much money they've spent now, but how much money they will spend. If we decide, we meet weekly and we make these decisions about adding tasks or not adding tasks. Those tasks are then estimated and a new budget is announced. Even if we haven't spent, the money yet, right? You've now decided you are going to spend the money. And again, this goes back to that ROI decision, because we then put that back up there and say, hey, do we still have an ROI? And, and the answer sometimes is no, we don't. Okay. What task do you want to get rid of? Okay. And it may not be the one you just added, but it may be another one now, right? You may say, oh yeah, well, you know what? Let's cut this one out here. We don't need to do that, right? We don't need that requirement anymore. But you are right. If you can't manage that on a real-time, week-to-week basis, that's exactly what will happen to you. Any kind of complex project where there's more than, 2 people involved. People will realize that new stuff has to be done, that new features have to be added, that, some DFM must happen, whatever the case may be, right? And if you can't see the results of that in your project plan, then you're really susceptible to that, right? And it's why, having a good process and a good system, right? The process of meeting each week, this discipline of you can't charge time to that project unless you've already been authorized, and it shuts you off when you've used your time, and adding new tasks and then analyzing the ROI, the budget again, right? That process is critical to keeping that from happening, getting everybody on the same page and on a real-time basis of what the budget and the ROI is. And again, we review that weekly, right? It's so important.
Rachel, how would you go about it?
That is Yep, that's what the research shows that the top 2 reasons why projects go over budget is scope creep, which is what we're talking about, and then poor budgeting, which I think most people can understand that happens. But those scope creep is huge in the research. There aren't a lot of quantifiable pieces of data on scope creep, but it is listed as the number 1 and number 2 reason why these projects go over budget. When you're doing something new, you want to add something, take away, like you were discussing.
Is that a conversation that should be had up front, Steve? Like, let's assume that I were to hire Finish Line, and I have a project. Bring it up to your table and be, hey, this is what I need. Can you guys help me out with this? You take a look at it and you say, yes, we can definitely assist. But do you leave some margin, or do you bring that up at the initial meetings where you say, hey, listen, we are going with this number for this particular task, but be aware that that could change if things were to evolve? Is that a conversation that you have early on as a PM?
Correct. Yeah. What we have learned to do over years and years is, okay, we get all the tasks, we get everybody to estimate them, we put it in our project planning thing, and it comes up with a number, $1,000, right? And then guess what we tell the customer is going to be between 1,000 and 1,500. And sometimes they'll see that, right? Because we show the project plan to them, obviously, right? And they go, hey, it only says $1,000 here. And then we have this conversation. Okay, yeah, right. But I'm telling you, there's tasks that we're going to have to do that are not in here. Okay. So plan on it. We're not saying we'd spend it. Okay. If it's only these tasks, that's what your number is going to be. But let's plan on it, at least a normal amount of task adding to the project. Why pretend that's never going to happen when it almost always happens, right? Let's just pretend it will happen. If for some reason it doesn't, we charge by the hour. It's one of the reasons we do that. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. So if we can do it for less, that's fantastic for you and us. Okay. We're plenty busy. It's not that we need to somehow generate our own work or something, right? So we're quite happy to do it for that amount. But if you anchor to that, right, and now you've got to add these tasks, that may be difficult, impossible, don't have the cash flow, blah, 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 right? let's be realistic here and not get down to wishful thinking, right? You don't want to plan the project in a way where it's just not going to happen, right? You just don't have enough budget. Because what happens in those kinds of plans, and this goes back to the discussion where I talked about the very first project where I didn't even know we were over budget, right? The manager in charge of that department at that time, he was super smart. He knew if we had these huge budget pressures on us, we'd skip steps and do all kinds of crazy things to try to get it back on budget. That costs more because you make huge mistakes that you don't detect them until you're way over here. And then you got to redo everything from the start. And guess what? You're still going to have to do all that work. You skipped, checklist and design reviews and blah, 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 blah. It does not result in a cheaper amount of money. That pressure, I'm not saying you shouldn't have zero pressure, but if you have too much pressure on your team to sort of try to perform to this unrealistic budget, you'll end up spending a lot more or abandoning the project because it just was so poorly executed. You have to have a realistic expectation. If that project was supposed to cost $10,000 and you budget $5,000, I guarantee you will do it over and you're going to have to spend the $10,000. Now the whole thing's cost you $15,000, not $10,000.
Other industry experts like you, Steve, call it apparently the rule of 10. In hardware development, an added or forgotten task increases 10x at every stage. So,
Yeah.
For example, it says $100 change in a design. It could become a $10,000 tooling change if you actually reach to that point on the manufacturing floor. You've made a mistake in the design.
All right, so
Right.
there's a lot of founders and people thinking about doing product development to listen to this podcast. So let's go with this scenario. I'm out here, I have a product and I'm trying to upgrade it, right? I have a version 1, I'm trying to go up to version 2. Limited budget, right? But with a potential high return on investment, high ROI. What should I be focusing on, Steve?
Well, I think there's a lot of answers. It's a very interesting question. There's a lot of answers to that. I'll give the most common one. Okay, the most common one, if we're talking about a startup or niche market company, is that what they really need the revisions for is what we in the trade call DFM, design for manufacturability, which simply means reducing the COGS. Okay. So, and this happens to us a lot, where somebody comes to us, they designed their product 10 years ago, and classically a competitor will come out with one that's half the price and has twice the features, and suddenly they're in a panic that, oh my God, I'm not competitive anymore, right? Which is another discussion about product roadmaps and that sort of thing, but that's another podcast.
Well, that's common. That's common.
And so they need to hurry. Okay, I'm sure it is. And so they need to hurry up and switch that. Okay. So, and typically in that stage, again, the requirements development is key. Okay. And this is how we approach these kinds of things. Okay. Because we go, all right, oh, you have, this in here. Let's just say it's a linear regulator. Okay. And we go, yeah, well, today we use a switching regulator. Okay. Why do we do that? Because now you don't need a fan and a big heat sink and blah, blah, blah. It's smaller and more energy efficient. That's going to save you, $5 a unit. You're making, 10,000 units a year. So that's $50,000, and it's going to cost us $10,000 to switch that out, to make that change. Okay. Oh, that's a good ROI. Okay, let's look at the next thing. Well, the next thing will say this, and it'll have, a payback period of this. And the next thing will have this, and it has a payback thing of this. So the way we do that requirements generation at that kind of project is by ranking all of these. Okay, here's number 1. This is the highest ROI thing to do. Here's number 2. That's the next highest. Here's number 3. Here's number 4. And every company has sort of a cutoff, right? The classic cutoff is, well, if you can't pay it back in 18 months, don't do it. Okay. Again, some people might be 12, some people might be 24 for different reasons, cost of capital and everything. And that allows the customer to make business decisions about product development, right? Not just engineering decisions about product development. Yes, the engineers are providing the information so they can make a good business decision. Okay. And that's the format it should be provided in, right? It should be provided in the form of, we're going to make these 5 because that's where our 18-month payback period is. And we're not doing these. Maybe we'll do those on our next product development, but not today. These are the ones that we should do. Why? Because they have less than an 18-month payback, and our cost of capital is X, and that means we get a return on our
So
investment.
based on the example that you used earlier, you guys were massively over budget, and it is what it is. That cannot be the case in a small company, because that may mean that the whole thing might go under. So
True. It's true. In the big company, it really was. I mean, they were spending keep in mind this was years and years ago. Okay. They were spending so little money relative to their revenue on product development. It was silly. So, us going over budget, although it was probably the 200% like Rachel talked about, I'm sure it was. The reality is it didn't even show up as a decimal point in any of their numbers in their final report. Okay. So, and that's probably why it was sort of complained about and sort of talked about and rumored about, but everybody just accepted it, right? They just knew that that would happen. Small company, very, very different story. If you often, these smaller companies are betting an entire year's profit on the next, product. Now that product might last 10 years. Okay. So sure, it makes sense, especially if you got to do it to stay competitive and stay in business, right? You don't really have a choice there. But if you go over budget, they may not even be able to pay anymore for that. So it is why you need a very robust process for small companies. Big companies, they don't care. They kind of expect it. And Apple's the same way, right? They could not spend enough on product development to have any effect on the P&L, right? They're just so much scale. And it's why we always say product development is so much different in a small company than it is in a big company, right? And this is one of the key reasons. You cannot be wrong about that, right? And it's why I preach over and over and over again. If you go out and talk to 100 product development people, somebody will tell you some low number, some unrealistic, totally ridiculous number, right? If you fall into that trap of sort of believing their, number, right, that can be an event that you can't recover from, right? That's why it's so important to make sure that your number is not magical thinking, but realistic, right, in a small company. And why it's important to have these stage
so let me
gates.
ask you, Steve. You say you're preaching this, hopefully not another podcast, dude. Only here. We need you spreading the gospel of product development in this one, okay? Uh, yeah, stay within the playbook, man. Can have you out there. All right. Well, now that you mentioned the differences between big companies and small companies, I think it's very curious because sometimes what we have seen in the past is that small companies and or startups, right? They will hire these big company individuals who bring their mentality over. And because they work at a big company, they're being perceived as these water walkers, right? Like these guys, the moment he signs the agreement, he's employed here. That's it, we're done. We can just pop the champagne. And then when they come over and we start working with them, you can tell very quickly they don't care about efficiency. They're like, no, it's fine. Let's just go with this route. And it doesn't matter if it costs 5, 10, 15x. Let's just do it. And you're like, oh, no, the company's not going to be able to survive. So there's a distinction out there.
That is, yeah, I have seen that happen so many times where somebody who's never even been involved in a startup, right? They've always worked for these, giant corporations, are suddenly, hired by some startup for whatever reason. They were retired before, or somehow they, figured out how to pay them or something, right? And it doesn't work. I mean, it does not work at all. I mean, the first big difference, and now we're talking about startups, which is a little bit different than niche markets, okay? But in a startup, um, nobody knows what'll work. Okay. Nobody knows what'll work for a product. You don't know the product market fit when you do a startup. You don't know your go to market strategy. You don't know your sales and marketing procedures that are going to work, et cetera, et
A
cetera, et
lot of
cetera. Okay.
unknowns.
But a person who's been in a big company, he knows what works because it works at General Motors, right? I came from General Motors, and this is the accounting system we used, and this is the manufacturing system we used, and this is this system and that system, and the go to market, and the blah, blah, blah. It works for GM, so it's got to work for here. And nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, he's right. It works for GM. That does not mean it works for you, right? There's a book on this called The Three Rules, which you can go read and is a different subject. But the first rule is there's no rules, which means there's no strategy, go to market strategy, procedures that are right for every company, right? And it's a great book because it academically proves this, right? That every company is unique, and what worked over there may doom this company. Okay. And having people that haven't had a sort of diverse experience in the startup world are a huge liability. Okay. They are a giant liability. Their sort of leadership ability, the ability to convince people, be able to sell, can really just drive the organization into these areas where it's not going to work. They don't have, number one, it probably won't work for what they're trying to do, because let's keep in mind, startups are about being disruptive. Mm-hmm. Not competing, right? A startup is figuring out what the product market fit is, not improving a product, right? The startup is figuring out what your sales and marketing strategies are going to be, not just incrementally improving ones that you've had for 100 years, right? And so you are absolutely right that startups should. It doesn't mean that they can't have those people as advisors or casual, right? Get their information, but don't weigh that any more than anybody else's opinion. That's only ideas to test. Okay. Don't assume it's gospel. In a startup, you got to test everything. You got to test your product market fit. You got to test your ads. You got to test your websites. You got to test.
I have a good one for you guys. Obviously not related to engineers and some marketing, but here's this one. So I was working with this client, and he got this big time, big shot marketing individual, right? And it's essentially the customer was basically wondering, why is he using us? Maybe you should be paying me because you're going to be in the presence of this older guy. And I'm like, man, well, maybe we'll see. So, we meet, we talk about the marketing approach. It was for a startup, and we have this round of things that we're trying to test. And this guy comes up and he says, well, I did an analysis. And I'm like, okay, great. And he's like, here are my findings. These are the top keywords for the these are the top terms and keywords that our industry needs. And I'm just like, okay, great, sure. What would you like to do? You like to create some ads around those? Will you want some experiments? What do you suggest? He's like, okay, well, very simple. I have experience doing this. What we're going to do is we're going to saturate the market on this. All of our expenditure is going to go in there, and we're going to basically like grab the entire keyword volume. And I'm like, okay, how are we going to do that? And they're like, direct our entire budget on it. Keep in mind that we have a very modest budget on that. If we do that, the budget will be consumed before the day starts. So,
and SEO might not even be the right thing to do. You might be better off with account marketing, account-based marketing. It may not even be a math.
I'm telling you,
thing, right? People may not even be.
It was fighting like
But that overconfidence I was talking about, right? Where the guy, it worked perfectly, so of course it'll work for you. So it's a good.
It's like the I believe, and it's not necessarily true, but like sometimes people pick habits based on their professional ecosystem. So if you work for a big company, you do things there that are what big companies do, right? Like I'm sure if you work for a big company, you have a massive marketing budget. Why not go all out? Like make a presence, disrupt, the entire thing. If you're a startup and you have a very lean budget, probably can't afford to do that. So we see that across the board. But anyways, I have a good one for you guys. So get this. Working with a project, we go over budget, the customer's pissed. What is the best way to approach that? Rachel, come on, give me something. How will you approach something like that?
Well, in my vast experience as a project manager, no. I think I would say we need to go back to the requirements document and see what did we agree upon in the scope of work that we initially set out to do. Do those things still achieve the ROI that we talked about? Are those, in our work, have we found out that those things are no longer going to help the product be successful? We need to move that task out, put a new one in. I think it's about communication, consistent communication, and being very upfront when things change with the customer. And building that trust and building that rapport with them also really helps.
This is not working out. When did Rachel became a PM? I mean, what's going on here? Guys, I know. What is this?
Well, and no disrespect to Rachel, but that's a lot easier said than done, right? If you don't have those systems in place to even know that you're going to go over budget, right? Even that is a pile of work, right? It's not easy to put the procedures in place and the systems in place so that that the decisions you're making today are now affecting the budget, right? Or knowing
I don't know, Steve. I think your dog agrees with Rachel, man. So where's the disconnect here?
She's absolutely right about the communications and being honest and realistic and, having a true collaborative relationship, right? We really, really try to become part of our customer's team, not as a vendor. Oh, do this. Okay, here you go, right? We really try to get what we call a seat at the table, which means they're telling us everything. They're not holding secrets back because they want to negotiate with us. Another reason to only charge by the hour, right? They're not, there's none of this sort of normal vendor customer relationship. It's much, much more like an employee and employer relationship, right? Where we're helping each other. We're a team, right? And our success is that teamwork. And if to the degree to which you can do that is the degree to which you're going to be successful or not, right? If you treat your product development company like a vendor, where you're constantly trying to, negotiate with them for whatever reason, okay, I guarantee you're gonna reduce the amount of success that's going to happen. You need to spend your time and efforts on focusing on what the product market fit is and getting that product designed into production, right? Not on trying to understand, who's going to pay for what. And in the end, the customer has to be the one to put the investment up, right? The product development company cannot do that. That doesn't work. They can't pay their mortgage with stock or IOUs. And if you don't pay them, they go out of business. That does not help you, okay? Believe me, none of these product development companies are raking in massive profits by any means. And it's not uncommon to have several years where they lose money, okay, for various reasons. So if the customer can't pay the bill, he's not going to win, and neither will they. Okay, so you need to understand that up front, right? That's a given. You have to pay for the work that those people are doing, just like you'd have to pay your employees for the work they're doing, right? No different than that. But the key is to make sure that you're honest with with that product development team, right? Give them all the information. Treat them like a partner, right? Not like a vendor. Really work with them, listen to them, make collaborative decisions together.
Wait, so
right? Not in isolation.
you guys get paid at finish line? I thought this is volunteering work. Wait, man, I gotta make some phone calls after this. This is not working out here. I'm learning a lot of things in this podcast. I thought it was, man, I've been here for years. What's going on here? I thought this was just like a long-term internship. That's what I thought. Gotta review this offer letter. See what you guys been giving me. Man, I'm telling you, something is off here. So, all right. So, if there's a founder watching this right now and he's thinking about doing product development, and it's a bit, hesitant because of all of this unknown and so on. What are the best ways that these things can be at least accounted for or planned for? What would you suggest, Steve?
You mean the extra
The
task?
budget. So like the budget,
Uh,
yeah.
well, right. The proper way to do the budget day one, right, is to go find projects that are similar to the one that you want to do and see how much they cost, right? We actually have a huge database of thousands of projects, right? And so day one, you can't build a bottoms up plan day one, right? You can't. You don't have enough information, right? But what you can do is say, you know what, this project looks very close to this project. That project cost, $10,000. So this one will probably cost
So who does that
$10,000.
math? So is that the founder who asks the product development company, or the product development company presents that data to the founder to create peace of mind?
Well, we present it. I think we're unique in that regard, right? One, I don't think a lot of other product development companies sort of care about ROI because they get all their business from big companies, right? They may say that oh yeah, we work with big and small company, which means I don't want to put anybody down, but they put the interns on the small companies and they go hell of
They
money,
will
which
put me on that. They will put me. Man, what is going on here? This is. It all makes sense
that's
now.
right. Right. And again, a big company, Apple just doesn't care, right? They don't really care about what the product development costs. It's a hyper competitive world, right? They only care that their product is more competitive, couldn't outspend the opportunity, right? And that's why they're Apple, okay? But that's not a startup. That's not a small niche market. These niche markets, they can never become Apple. Now, maybe a startup will, but they didn't raise enough money to compete with Apple day one. That's for damn sure, right? Maybe they'll do it later. Okay. So, so again, difference between big company and small company. In a small company, in a startup, how do you get confidence that you really are going to get an ROI day one? Okay, before you can build that plan I was talking about with all
Mm.
that kind of stuff, you need to look at a similar project and see what that cost, right? And that's probably what yours is going to cost, right? And I know that a lot of uh, government organizations now mandate
Mm.
this. So a lot of organizations, they used to say, okay, we need a bridge, the bridge needs to be here, how much for the bridge, and what would happen is, they would pick the low cost bidder who would then just scope creep it, right? Oh, we didn't know there were rocks in the river, we can't drill without that, we got to remove that, okay, we got to, it almost because they were picking the low cost bidder, it almost encourages this
Mm.
behavior, hiding costs that they know will come. They know these costs will come. Okay. But what can they do? The government says they're going to pick the low cost bidder. So now what a lot of them do is they say, okay, yeah, well, we may pick the low cost bidder, but if you can't point to a project that is pretty similar to this one and what its actual cost was, your bid is thrown out. So if your bid is $50 million, but you can't show me a bridge that was either by you or somebody else was built for $50 million that's similar to this one, then your bid is not realistic. Go
That's
away.
pretty interesting.
I would recommend our customers, again, small companies and startups, to do exactly the same thing. Oh, you think this will only cost $5,000? Show me a product that's similar to this that was built for
Mm.
$5,000. Okay. If they can't, it's not
Mm.
real. It may be wishful
Mm.
thinking. Who knows why they're doing it? Okay, but don't believe.
Okay, that's. I think you might be having some technical difficulties, Steve.
Yeah, we lost you at the end.
Yeah, I think I have a little internet thing there if it broke up. Did you get the last part where you in order to build day one? Okay, day one, you want to you have an idea. Oh, I'm going to make a digital music player. Okay, how much is that going to cost to develop? Oh, that's going to cost $100,000. Okay, if you can't point to a project, you go, oh, why do you think it's going to cost $100,000? Oh, because we built this phone, and the phone is very similar to this thing. It has a screen and buttons and memory, and we built that or designed that for $100,000. So we can design this one for $100,000. Instead of somebody just saying, yep, that's our bid.
Got it.
Right. There's a big difference between saying, sure, this is very similar to this. We designed this. That was how much it cost, versus somebody just pulling that number out of where and claiming that it's accurate.
What about, I was going to ask you, Steve,
Go ahead.
what about having the discipline to stay organized when it comes down to the task? Do you think that is something that the company or the founder, the business needs to keep in mind in order to keep costs lean? Like, hey, listen, I would like for the perfect product, it needs to have this 10 features, but for now we can go to market and start generating a profit with this 4. Let's go with those.
I think it was Warren Buffett who said, I may be paraphrasing his quote here, but he says, we don't have to be smarter than all the rest. We just have to be more disciplined. And I will tell you, a few decades of business experience, he's exactly right. You don't have to be smarter than everybody else on the planet. In fact, it may even hurt you. But you do have to be extremely disciplined in business. And that is especially true for a startup, right? We see so many startups who they raise a little money, they hire a whole bunch of people. There's no procedures, plan, et cetera, who knows how these people perform. They've never been together before. And, they quickly run out of runway and they can't pay the people. So they got to let them all go and they shut down. Right. And it's a very, very, very common experience. Right. And you would compare and contrast that with being lean, right? Which is, okay, I hired a little bit of money. What are the things that I have to do to qualify for that next round, right? This is an example of discipline, right? Just to compare and contrast those two things. And more importantly, what are those things that I don't have to do to qualify for the next round? Because in a startup, it's all about survival. The one who survives to the end is going to be in business, and all the other people who had exactly the same idea, right? They're all going to go out of business, right? And the key is to survive, right? You cannot run out of money, which means if you spend any money, it better qualify you for the next round of investment, right? And that's different at every stage of that startup's investment. And you've got to have that discipline. And I see too many founders who have this vision of this perfect product, which is great. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why they are visionary startup people. But if you raise a small seed round, it's unlikely you're going to get to that perfect product on day one. You just don't have enough money. Okay. You're going to have to settle for something a little bit less. Let's face it, the first Apple computer was far from perfect. Okay. IBM and the rest of the computer media called it a toy. It didn't even think it would sell. Like, who would you sell that to? It can't do anything. Okay. It was not the Apple computer of today. Okay. Now they're a big company and they do make perfect products, but that's not how they started, right? They started very, very modest. You had to actually solder the components onto the board yourself, right? That was the first part of the thing that was wrong, right? But you are right about that discipline, right? And that is true in a startup. It's also true in the product development world, right? Like, we often see the niche market people, right? They'll design a product and never generate a requirements document. Sometimes they come to us and say, hey, can you do a design review, or can you test this? And we go, oh yeah, sure we can. And can you give us a requirements document? What's that? Okay. And we have to explain it to them. And then they want us to do a design review. And we go, well, how are we? Well, just see if it works. Well, what's the definition of work, right? I mean, what is that? Can you write it on a piece of paper? We'll call that the requirements document, right? But the point is, like, if you don't have the discipline to sit down and write a requirements document, any product will do, because there's no requirements, okay? At least not that are written down and understand by the whole team, right? If you don't have that discipline to go through these product development steps, you're going to find that you spent a lot of money and you have a product that you can't sell.
What do you mean, Steve? All I need is a prototype. Give me the prototype.
For what?
Oh, the prototype.
A very real world and larger industrial example of kind of similarly to what you're talking about is apparently how they built the Sydney Opera House. In my research, I was looking at some planning fallacies, and they knew they wanted to do those famous shells on the top of the Sydney Opera House, but they hadn't figured out exactly how they were going to build those. So in the meantime, they built the foundation first. Once they figured out how to build the shells, the foundation could not support the shells, so they had to hammer up the entire foundation. It was originally budgeted at $7 million, and it ended up costing $102 million and took 10 more years than they suspected. I'm sure that was one of many instances that happened similarly with this planning fallacy. They're unknown unknowns, they're unknown knowns. This is a problem when you're doing something new, right?
Hurry up, build it. Look, we're doing something. We have the foundation built. We're making progress, right?
They may have been pressured with the budget that doesn't actually translate to getting a good
real, right?
Yep.
Well, I believe that due to this conversation and what transpires in different industries, right? We talked about government contractors, opera house, product development, and startups, small companies. I think it goes without saying that product development or development in general is just very complex and complicated.
It's true.
What do you think, Ray?
It is true, and I will tell you, when I started my career, one or two engineers could design a product, right? And today that would take so much longer and cost so much. I mean, I don't want to say one person couldn't do it, but my God, it would take so long. I mean, there's just the degrees of specialization that have occurred, over the last 40 years is tremendous. You really need a team and systems and processes to handle that complexity, right? It's the easiest way to go over budget is, like you said, no discipline, no procedures, no systems in place, guarantee to go over budget, right? It's just inevitable.
Rachel, what can we do to stay on budget next time?
Well, first we can go to our website, because at our resources tab, we do have a bunch of blogs. And there is one called Why do Product Engineering Projects Always Go Over Budget, and What to Do About It. So it's not just oh no, what do we do? We have some solutions, and we've talked about them. The communication, the stage gate, just changing up how you approach product development can really help the budget going over.
I like that. All right, so we have a really good one for next week. We have a good one. This one was good. We talked about budgets. And it's going to be a little sideway into it. So for our next episode, we're going to be covering the importance of having clear, defined requirements and why they are important. Very, very often we hear people say, "Oh, I don't need the requirements. Just do it. Just do it. Forget about it." And then the problem starts. So, Steve, what can you tell us very briefly about that?
I think we hit on that a couple of times in this meeting. It is the most important part of product development. If that's wrong, then everything after it is wrong. It leverages everything. So if that does not define the product market fit and a return on investment, then you should not move forward, period, right? And just assuming that everybody knows what the requirements are, or they're so simple, or I really don't understand why people don't do them, other than maybe they just aren't aware of what product development is all about. But that, if you get that wrong, it doesn't matter. You could be on budget, but you're still not going to make any money, because unless you're super lucky, you don't have the right product market fit, right? You just
All right.
don't.
So, hey, for our audience, Steve, you're just,
I won't.
come on, man. We got to cut it short here. But hey, Man, we need material for next week, man. What's going on here? All right, so if you guys don't have your requirements ready to go, please, please, please don't jump into anything. Wait until next week so you can hear our message and then decide what the deal is. That's all for now, guys. It has been a tremendous pleasure. Steve Owens, Rachel Trunks, Raphael here. We'll stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
That's a wrap on this week's Product Development Playbook with the Finish Line crew. Tune in next week for more insights.